Hello everyone and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Lee Cronin. Lee is the Regius Professor of Chemistry at the University of Glasgow and the founder and CEO of Chemify. He is known for his approach to the digitization of chemistry and developing digital to chemical transformation known as Chemputing, which can turn code into reactions and molecules. Lee has developed a new theory for evolution and selection called assembly theory, which aims to quantify and explain how selection can occur in chemistry before biology. He has published over 550 papers, given over 500 lectures, and has written extensively on all aspects of science, from the origin of life to artificial intelligence. Lee, welcome to the Future Space.
It's great to be here.
Fascinating stuff, and I can't wait to delve into it. But before we do that, could you share with us 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
I was trying to not think of 3 phrases. So the 3 words I would come up would be causal, gigantic, and combinatorial.
Do you want to give a little bit of explanation to your thought process and the words?
So space doesn't really exist in the way that we think it does. Space is the thing that happens when objects interact, and there's literally causation is kind of causes space to exist. So the fact you can cause objects. And the more combinatorial the objects, the larger the space. This is a pet theory of mine, which I use to antagonize physicists. It's probably quite wrong because obviously space is at least an epiphenomena. It's getting bigger. There was a Big Bang. But certainly something caused the Big Bang, and there is combinatorial stuff going on in it, and it is gigantic. But chemical space is even bigger than outer space. So I want to be a kind of investigate not just outer space but chemical space.
Do you like to be the devil's advocate and kind of stir a little bit of?
Always, not only the devil's advocate, but basically just criticize the idea so I can get better understanding. It's still wild to me that in academia, sometimes in STEM subjects, the idea of kind of philosophical like criticism is still, it's kind of, people don't like it, or they're not used to it rather, probably. Whereas I'm like, why does that work? Why do you do that? Doesn't seem right. That seems upside down.
It sounded like I was listening to my mother when I was young, because that was exactly what I was, constantly asking the whys and pushing buttons. And not just because I wanted to create trouble, it's because I was extremely curious and I wanted to know and understand the thought process. And often in conversations, I'm less interested about the conclusion, but understanding how the rational, if there is one, first of all, and then the rational, because I have more respect to the rational than to the result often.
Asking the question is the important thing. I was always the same. In fact, I have not stopped.
Curiosity should not stop. Lee, if I ask you what is the human story of space, what would be your answer?
I mean, the human beings on Earth is where the first place, arguably, where consciousness in the abstract sense has emerged. And human beings have kind of been able to talk to each other and build abstractions and build structures to the testament to those abstractions. And I think really getting consciousness off Earth and human consciousness, because I think maybe the consciousness is the only consciousness we genuinely can interact with, and I mean in terms of information exchange, not talking to animals who are self-aware, where there's abstraction of humans. So I think the story there is to try and get those ideas out from the planet Earth into the universe, and to make sure they outlive the humanity that exists on Earth, and indeed might even be responsible for propagating humanity in some way. And I think we are traveling in space, right? We are moving to new parts of space. I think we probably don't really understand that we're traveling around our sun, which is traveling around the galaxy, which is traveling through the universe. I'm guessing we are in virgin space all the time. So I'd like to kind of, get consciousness off, not necessarily like Elon Musk, but in a slightly more philosophical sense.
For me, when I saw what is about to happen, or about to take life of the planet, But I kind of realized that we're about to give life its biggest gift, because what would be the point in growing in complexity over billions of years only to be limited on a tiny speck in a big universe? Because it will, independently with us or without us, it will come to an end when the sun explodes. And it would be such a waste of, I guess, investment. And you work a lot with the definition of life. What are your thoughts about what I just said, and what is life's kind of goal ultimately?
So I have lots of thoughts. I mean, although if you look, Carl Sagan, when he got, I think it was Voyager 1 to turn around and take a snapshot of Earth and said with a pale blue dot, I actually think he gave the wrong impression. I think we should have taken a photograph of Voyager through all the lineage of technology, starting with the Stone Age, going all the way up, and said, how big is Earth? Because Earth is big in time, and in terms of the oldest things on Earth are life forms. So I think that that's a really important thing to bear in mind, that although the Earth is a tiny speck in the universe, I wonder if we're looking at it wrong, because the combinatorial accessibility of Earth is huge. Now, what does that mean? That means probably life on Earth is never going to die, ever, because we will be always inventing new ways to survive. When the sun starts to expand, I'm sure that we'll have a technology that we can use to kind of stop that from expanding. We might take mass from the sun, we might move the Earth further out, we might basically say, okay, we will go interstellar. I think the information that we have developed that we're taking from generation to generation is only going to increase. As long as we are increasing knowledge, I think the future is bright for life on Earth. And I think the current, gloomy view of the universe from the standard canon of physics, that we're going to die in a heat death, is probably not right. So that's one comment. I think when it comes to measuring life, I started measuring life because I got fed up arguing people about what life is, my thoughts have moved a long way, and since that beginning. And I guess as a chemist, I was fascinated by the fact that there was arguments about what biology is. We can see biology, if you can eat it, have sex with it, it can move, right? It's biological. And what does that mean, right? So everything on Earth that has gone through these lineages of copying and life and death are related by, obviously, the genetic information and the environment. And so when I started to think about the origin of life, I want to understand how life turns into, how sand turns into cells and create life in the lab. I think the process that gives rise to life is as basic as a physical process like gravity or electromagnetism. And I wanted to find out what that is, and I still do, and I think we're getting closer. So that's the first point. So first thing was life is the thing that causes life is a really interesting and obvious phenomena, but isn't exciting. We have no idea what it is. Point number one. Point number two, when you go and talk to chemists and biologists and physicists about what life is, they all argue because they don't know what life is. They will not give you a standard answer. They argue about replication, metabolism, has to have all these features. So then I figured, and I've been interested in complexity since I was 14, right? I was busy kind of trying to do machine learning back then, which machine learning for me is taking the data, compressing the data with some elbow grease, and then basically needing to use less resources to read it out, which is kind of what ChatGPT does, compresses things down and you can get it out. And yeah, you can get surprised. And so I was interested in complexity because everybody's arguing about what complexity is in the same way you're arguing about what life is. And then about 5 or 6 years, it dawned on me that I would come up with a very simple question and say, hey, how complex does a molecule need to be before you can say that that molecule is made by biology? It's uniquely created. And I'll use the word creative as provocatively because although I am not a creationist, despite the protests of some people and the internet, I'd love to be one. What I mean by that is I would like to make life, right? Make life, but would I be a real creationist because, the Big Bang created me? But anyway, so I thought that molecules, complex molecules, could be an unambiguous evidence of life. But the chemists all said to me, no, that's not true because complex molecules are easy. And I'll stop there. Maybe you can ask some questions. I think we can unpack that. It's so interesting that the arguments happen about measuring what life is, and then I thought we have to just measure it.
So with that definition, and I think it's important to make a difference between something that is alive and the consciousness or the idea of entity or identity. With your definition, the universe is alive, right? Because it creates complexity at scale, correct?
Well, not quite. So that's where it gets really interesting, because the first bit was like the first start of the journey to defining life or through measurement was saying how complex a molecule does a molecule need to be to come from life. And the chemists would say, no, that's poppycock, because complex molecules can randomly form, random process. And I was using mass spectrometry, which is a technique to weigh molecules and cut them up and measure the number of fragments. And I had this intuition that actually the technique accounted for that. And it did, because to actually get a reading, you had to have identical molecules, many thousands. And the really precise definition, or the precise measurement definition, is if you have a large number of identical complex molecules, that's molecules you can cut into a number of different parts, there is a threshold beyond which those molecules can only be produced by a biological process. And if the complexity is a readout of the construction process, the cell. And then I got quite exciting, because then the measurement of the complexity of the molecule itself was evidence of the living process that produced that molecule. Now, when I realized this, I realized that all the definitions of complexity that have been discussed for the last 50 or 60 years are, I wouldn't say wrong, they're not helpful for normal human beings. If you happen to be a computer scientist and you're trying to ask how much memory I need to solve a mathematical problem, or how much time I need, the definitions are perfect. But I realized that the definitions of complexity we have were all not applicable to life, technology, and evolution. And assembly theory and the assembly equation was developed to actually sort this problem out. And that's happened over about 6 years, to much amusement, because it's made so many people excited. Let's put it that way.
Well, it's always exciting when it will come up, because it threatens, the status quo and people's assumption once they become comfortable into wherever they are. Lee, I got a question for you. For someone who has spent a lot of time doing solo wilderness expeditions and kind of really sitting and looking at nature, observing nature, I've come to understand that the fundamentals of life, right, the process of life is messy by design. It's built on these foundation of disruptions, creation, destructions, because life doesn't want perfection, because there's nowhere to go. It wants to adapt, evolve, and moving forward. And what humans have become expert at is figuring out how to move forward. But unfortunately, it is messy by design. Every organism has to find itself into a place where they have put their surrounding environment to stress, because that stress creates two incentives. It forces you to reassess what works and what doesn't work, and then it gives the other 50% the incentive to go beyond, to put the extra effort to go beyond the mountain, go beyond the river, go beyond, and now we're talking about the planet. Is that something that you also find in your work, that unfortunately life doesn't want the little perfect equation? You have to go through that really stressful and hard transformational stage?
No, I think the messiness is great, right? Because it's so complicated. Life, when it comes down to it, is actually matter in the universe learning how to persist longer than its inanimate lifetime. This is something I realized in the last few weeks. So inanimate matter has a lifetime, a configuration. If you were to draw your name in the sand, wind would blow the name away. If, however, every time you spotted it being blown away and you redrew it, that your name in the sand is a living entity coupled to you because you are always copying it and redoing it and redoing it. And of course, that process is not perfect, but it's not meant to be, because the imperfections actually allow by chance adaptation, whether it's intellectual, genetic, or situational. So you get a better chance of surviving or maybe unluckily dying. And so the process of variation is important because the environment is always changing. And if the environment never changed, then evolution would have never happened. In fact, inanimate matter wouldn't have had the drive. And I'm kind of making it almost teleological. It's not. Teleology kind of emerges in assembly theory quite naturally, which is kind of really nice because you then get away from this. Lots of people dismiss teleology and evolution as being, religious. So no, I think messiness of life is actually one of the mechanisms by which life exists, persists, thrives, and survives.
So our aim as a species should be to do everything that we can to find solutions to be resilient and to really teach our people the skills to navigate their resilience rather than trying to stay in the statics and be afraid of everything that comes and threatens.
That's what intellectual curiosity does a bit. But life is also investing in, like, I don't want to make you afraid. Just go and mess around in the environment and then reward it. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, but I was just going to make a parallel with, like, even a metaphor, like a immune system. The only way that an immune system can develop itself is by being exposed to external agents so that it can develop its resilience. Because if you isolate it too much, then we have allergies, or we have an organism that overreacts for any external agents. Do you think, working with life and working with the big perspective, do you think that as a society we've come to romanticize what life or what nature is?
Yeah, I offended some people when I was like talking about climate change, right? And I was like, I want to burn as much fossil fuel as possible. And I was like, what? I was like, I want to burn it. If the system would allow me to burn more fossil fuel, I will. And I'm not meaning that it's not like the same thing as I'm going to empty my bin out on the street. And I guess in a way it is. But what I'm trying to say is, like, we want to basically understand how we can make sure that we're developing knowledge at the right rate so that we have enough knowledge to explore the environment, make it better. In Victorian England, the air quality was terrible, the water quality was terrible, we'd just gone into the Industrial Revolution, life expectancy was low, poverty differentials were high, and look what's happened. And one of the things now is I can see that people are romanticizing nature and also doing incorrect things to protect it, like the Green Movement in Germany or anti-nuclear movement. And I think one of the things we have to do is help each other get access to more energy and more knowledge. Because when we have more energy, of course we're going to basically build big CO2 funnels and remove the CO2 from the atmosphere and do it quickly. Right now, so I think there is this overly romanticized thing. And I remember actually watching a David Attenborough program and loved David Attenborough, a brilliant broadcaster, but there was all these seals, long-tusked seals, falling off this cliff, dying. And my son was like, that's really sad. I went, no, that's awesome. That's evolution. Look at the ones down there that aren't climbing up the cliff. They've got the right gene to survive. The fact we've just thinned out the herd is pretty awesome. The fact we are overly projecting our own emotions to protect, that we want to protect our friends, our family, our children onto it, is a kind of accident of evolution. So yeah, we deeply over-romanticize it. That doesn't mean we should go out and basically burn everything. We want to generate knowledge, and I think that's the one thing that humans have discovered through technology. Technology is overwhelmingly a good thing.
Absolutely. And we've created such a bad narrative about who we are as a species, thinking that we destroy everything, and then if humans were not part of the equation, everything else would be so much better on Earth. And I'm like, well, try to go and give birth by yourself naked into the forest and see how nature really treats you. Nature is not really the kindest force out there. So, and it's true. I mean, the history, we romanticize the past, and we think that there's a point in the past that we can go back to where everything worked perfectly. But when people do that, they are doing it with the expectation to go back with all the benefits that they've acquired, all the advantages. And so, but that it doesn't work like this, right? Even the advantages and the benefits that we have today is a complex result of the pros and cons of what it means to create, develop technology. But overwhelmingly, we're 8 billion on the planet doing much, much better than we used to. So there's something right going. But again, it's messy by design, these agent like progress. And you touch on something that for me, I find it as one of the biggest irony of nuclear energy. It is a dangerous technology, but it's such a tremendous power, clean power. And you look into the 70s, and before the 70s, the environmental movement was pro-nuclear until the Sierra Club did a huge campaign and was successful and managed to turn the relationship of the environmental movement with nuclear, and then it became anti-nuclear. But how the world might be really different today had we continue embracing nuclear and finding solution. And I think that the motto should be for us how to do more but better rather than trying to do less and go back into the past. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, a couple of my friends like conserving things and turning off the lights, and I think it's fine, right? But I think that we had price hikes in the UK thanks to the Ukraine conflict, and that exposed the way our energy networks go. And we just have to sort that out, and we are going to sort that out. But I think there is a really bright future for nuclear. I think we might leapfrog a little bit to fusion, but I think the enthusiasm is a little bit over hyped. And I just can't wait for Mr. Fusion, like in Back to the Future 2, I think.
Yes, fed with banana peels at that point.
Exactly, yeah. So I think you're right. And I think one of my jobs as a scientist, why I'm actually also an entrepreneur, is like, if the taxpayer, the universe, whatever, gives me money to do new things, and I find a new thing, of course I like writing papers about it. It's fun to tell your peers. But if your peers are like, meh, you're like, no, this is really going to change things. So I figured, I should put my money where my mouth is, or put someone else's money where my mouth is, and actually try and build a company to do it. And I think there's a lot, thinking about new science, building new technologies. And we have a pretty interesting environment to do this. And I think that things are only going to get better and better and better.
I'm actually looking forward for a future where we have 10, 15, 20 billion people living on and beyond Earth. Just because if you make the numbers of like how much life has changed on Earth because the access to knowledge has become bigger and bigger and bigger. And if we have, 15 billion population in the future, just having 1% of that wakes up every morning trying to find solution, it's like it's exponential of the solution that we'll try to find, and the problems, things will move more rapidly. But the thought that is constantly behind in the back of my mind is, I go back to how life on Earth for 1 billion plus year was evolving, but kind of quietly when it was single cell organism. When it made that gigantic leap from single cell to multi-cell, evolution exploded on the planet. We're about to go from single planet to multi-planet. That leap is huge, right? The figuring out the technology. But once we've made that leap, suddenly the new field of possibility is enormous. And I think that it's just going to create a new explosion on evolution. So what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think there are these bottlenecks, these are technological bottlenecks. And everyone uses the single cell argument that life was boring and all this. And I said, well, life didn't care about time, right? It just didn't care. It was hanging around. It was building technologies. And suddenly there's a massive leap in some regard because the right things line up, and suddenly you're able to get access to metabolic production of oxygen, and then oxygen in the atmosphere increases, and suddenly we change our metabolisms, and some of us die, become oxidized. Same with, there's a narrow window in which we can build rockets and get them out of the Earth's gravity well, and for us right now, and we've found it. And I'm pretty sure that Starship is going to go to Mars. It might not be pretty, but they're going to try, and trial and error is a great thing, particularly with technology. So I think, even if we don't make it to Mars quickly, what we will do is we'll build, we'll leave Earth and we'll build structures, and we'll build more structures and build more structures. And in a way, you'll just hop from structure to structure to structure. Because why would you go all the way to Mars when, when you could just basically leap from, island to island and hang out and look at the view and get refueled? So there's lots of ways to do it. And it'll be interesting to see if SpaceX and Blue Origin and all the others kind of start to develop that. But I want one of them to give me a ride to the moon so I can put a computer on the moon. I want to put some technology on the moon to make molecules on the moon, because the moon doesn't have any good chemistry. It's kind of boring, so we want to change that. But that's just an aside.
When people say we're going to go and mess up environments that are barren and sterile, I'm like, why not? I mean, if there's no point to life for places to be sterile, there's a beauty for evolution to happen. But you mentioned, about Mars. If we look at the age of exploration, ocean exploration, it's the same thing that happened. There was the idea of India, spices, that was kind of the big carrot. But in the process, everything, North America ended up being the big discovery, while originally it was not the intent. And at the same time, every single little place that they found, if it was worth developing a settlement, then they would do it. Great. It was messy. There was conflicts with some populations that were there before. But I believe that in space is going to be the same thing. We have these carrots, but ultimately evolution or spreading into the universe will kind of follow similar patterns. We'll follow water. Now we discover that water is really present in many places, so we'll find these settlements that will basically kind of lead us in all different directions. But for Mars to be the end of all, I don't think that it's the right strategy. How do you think we're going to... I mean, you did mention little bits and pieces of settlements, but beyond that, how do you think it's going to work?
There are kind of three limits. If I was going to be just care about biology getting off Earth, I could imagine accelerating single cells to almost the speed of light and just firing them into the cosmos to see what happens. But there is a minor problem of these things slowing down and not being destroyed. I do like the idea also of beaming a self-replicating machine instruction set in some way that it doesn't have to be received by intelligent beings, but if we can somehow use that to make small machines on the planet where the signal implants itself through some mechanism that I don't yet know, and then those machines, as they get more complicated, are able to read more information and then keep going. You do something like that, but probably the most simple thing to imagine would be to have some kind of self-replicating architecture, which may or may... So the self-replicating architectures we know right now in life on Earth and humans on spaceships, but will humans on spaceships last long enough? Is there a kind of self-replicating probe you can build that would be programmed to go look for stuff and then, process that stuff into more probes and then carry on going and rebuilding and maybe evolving as it goes? The thing against that is that, space is expanding quite rapidly, and understanding how that might happen is probably beyond my mere intellect. But I don't think it's out of the question. I used to think if we can't get to Mars, as humans, we could just send biology to Mars, send some cacti, send some bacteria that are really hardy, that can survive and use the environment. And over a few billion years, the environment will be terraformed by the life we send there. That might be a way of doing it, is to figure out what minimal life forms you can send rather than humans. The thing is, humans are not really very well evolved to Mars. Wrong gravity, wrong environment, and so on. So really, what you want to do is send a toolkit to objects in space that can exploit the environment and resources in the environment to create a new ecosystem. And I think that's how evolution works. And my very strong intuition is that there's life everywhere in the universe, but not as we know it. And it's because life as a process is about matter being persistent through pre-biotic evolution and to carry on, finding forms that will survive over time. And we're going to see that more and more and more. So I think that humans might want to exploit that phenomena, but I just don't know. But I'm pretty optimistic we're going to go back to the moon. I'm optimistic we're going to try to go to Mars. I just can't help thinking. I mean, if nothing else, like Venus, the upper atmosphere of Venus, although it's not the nicest place in the world, we can definitely send bacteria there. Why not? Give it a cold.
Absolutely. I'm totally for that. You mentioned having a computer on the moon and having to do chemistry. What would you have the computer do on the moon?
Originally for fun, I probably shouldn't say it because we'll get told off because I'm a CEO and a professor, is send a Chemputer, that's a chemical computer, a computer that does chemistry, like make stuff, and get it to make meth on the moon. Why meth? Well, meth is illegal. You don't want to make meth on Earth. You go to prison in virtually almost every jurisdiction. But by making meth on the moon, you get to be an anarchist and say, well, what law am I breaking? Who's stopping me from making meth on the moon, right? And so it opens up a question of who sets the law, who owns the moon. But probably the one thing I would make on the moon, if there were astronauts that use it, is Viagra. So Viagra is actually, obviously the uses for sexual malfunction is one thing, but what it does do is it reduces the partial pressure of oxygen you need to be able to process information. So actually some high altitude climbers use Viagra to be able to climb higher without oxygen. And in a low oxygen environment, something like Viagra might help you stretch your oxygen resources without suffering. But I think there are side effects. I think if you take Viagra climbing a mountain, you get a pretty bad headache coming down. But anyway, I'm an anarchist. The anarchist in me, I would not make meth in my lab or in Chemify or anywhere like that, but on the moon, where there's no laws, why not? Before we have the moon burning man.
There's a lot of initiatives to use low orbit to manufacture in either biology or chemistry because gravity affects certain things on process here on Earth. Is that something that you're looking into, some of the experiments that can be done in zero gravity?
Well, believe it or not, I actually sent up a probe with a company called Space Pharma. I think it was 2018, and on it was a big Indian rocket that launched 103 probes at once, and it was I think it was Dido 2, the satellite, and on Dido 2 we basically made an anti-cancer drug, and I was like, it was only a one-step reaction, and it's not a particularly good anti-cancer drug. It's a DNA binding agent. But the sad thing was, we kind of miscalculated the power requirements to keep the probe warm, and the reaction happened really slowly because we want to see the crystals grow. The problem is that it's just so expensive, and a friend of mine who has a facility in Japan, big mine shaft, where they basically drop experiments down the mine shaft because you get a few seconds of 0G, and you can do experiments. But it's expensive, and for me right now, I'm not sure what I would really do. However, as soon as Blue Origin and whoever else opens up space, and you've got hotels, facilities, hack dens, whatever, then sure, I'll go there and try some stuff because I think without gravity or microgravity, there's really interesting chemistry you can do. It'd be very interesting to understand self-organizing systems. How does gravity help cellular organization? Of course, it would appear that biomechanical feedback is the dominant force that shapes everything, right? Growing cells, embryos, and so on. That gravity doesn't have a huge effect, but it does have an effect. So I haven't really thought about it that much, but I'd love to live in a future where basically when things become available, I do them, right? It's like, well, I remember bit first starting as a professor and thinking, well, I don't have enough money to do any experiments. But then I was looking the wrong way around. It's like, what resources do I have in my department? What things that no one is using? And kind of exploit that until I ask new questions. So yeah. Go and build me a facility in space. And once you've built me one, I will have questions. Before then, I'm struggling to have the best questions because I just don't know.
I was recently at a conference and they were talking about the problem of debris in orbit, low orbit, high orbit. But the irony is to fix the problem, we have to increase access as much as possible so that you can start creating an economy with the problem that needs to be fixed. So once the reality is there, there's no other way but forward in trying to...
We have to make a mess. It's going to be great. And then what's going to happen is there's going to be some entrepreneur who says, oh, you've made a mess in orbit. I'm going to mine the mess in orbit. I'm going to collect the garbage and I'm going to turn that into a material. I mean, it's quite diffuse, right? And you've got gravity pulling it in. It's not quite like the film Gravity where, everything would collide because space is quite big. And I guess it won't be that big a deal, but you probably don't want to hit an object when you're launching into space. That's probably not the best outcome, and I'm sure that will happen.
I was just thinking for your some of your experiments, there's always zero gravity flights, a little bit less expensive, but you can always do experiments in those.
Yeah, these parabolic flights, I would think about doing something, but I have so many things to do right now. It's like, it's kind of like, I was thinking of flying drones around my lab to move chemicals around, and then I realized it would just spray the chemicals everywhere, and probably the safety officer would not be happy.
Do you feel that we're about to enter a new gold rush or a golden era of chemistry and biology, like in the next 20, 50 years?
I think so. I mean, we're already in a golden era of molecular biology and understanding mechanism. Biology is still quite hard. I think the easiest of the hard, wet subjects is chemistry, right? But I think chemistry has been classically limited by the culture, the artistry, and the lack of intersecting technologies. I am a wannabe physicist, a wannabe mathematician, a wannabe computer scientist, a wannabe engineer, and also most days a wannabe chemist. But I have enough of those competence in those areas to play with building technologies. And for the longest time, when I'm building stuff, we used to be going to my peers going, is this cool? Would you like this? And they're like, what are you doing? This is nonsensical. I realised more and more that it wasn't them being dismissive for nasty reasons. They just genuinely couldn't see the point of digitizing chemistry. And literally what we've done and what we're doing, which I think will will change things quite profoundly. And not just me, I think the whole field. I'm the one who started asking the stupidest questions first, was could you build a programming language for chemistry? And if you could build a programming language from the bottom up, would that allow you to do, more precise things at scale, enable people who aren't chemists, make new molecules and all that? So I think we're getting there. And both my company, Chemify, which I've set up, so shameless plug, sorry, and my research group that is building technology for collaborations and working around the world are getting there. But there's lots of other people, but they still haven't realised the trick. And I'm trying to convince people to solve the trick, which is to really think about how you program it and how you orchestrate it. But yeah, look, I think chemistry is going to enter a revolution very similar to molecular biology, PCR, genomic sequencing. We have the periodic table, we have quantum mechanics, things are discrete, so we should be able to make a kind of Turing machine for chemistry, and that will change a lot of things. And we're just getting going. I'm trying to convince myself I'm not delusional, but
well, if we look the trends and how far we are compared to where it started, it's just common sense, and it's not even being optimistic or naive. It's just being realist of our capacity to be resourceful, and I think that now and this was going to be the next question. You think that AI is one of the missing tools that's going to allow that leap in discovery, like expanding the periodic table?
Actually, no, I don't think so. They probably wouldn't. So AI can't discover anything, right? And because it's an inductive system. But what AI will allow us to do, which is brilliant, will be to, where we don't have a theory yet, or we have a meta theory, it would allow you to basically have a machine that will just make sense of causal structures coming in. I think there's a danger that we will get addicted to those machines and not really, it will remove our ability to discover and find novel things. But I actually don't think so. I think it'll be the other way around. I think it accelerates it. I think if you called AI augmented informatics, I'd be like, hell yeah. I don't want to solve every equation analytically and then do it numerically, or it's like, why would I do that if I've got a system that would do that? So in terms of the periodic table, could it expand the periodic table? Well, using confinement to perhaps do nuclear chemistry, where you could maybe try to, I'm just making this up, but it's possible, where you could bombard nuclei together and try and find an island of stability beyond where, because what happens in the periodic table is the atoms get bigger and bigger and more unstable. But there are some speculations that you can jump and you can get to materials that are just more stable. These kind of, and they're very large atoms and quite gigantic. Could we use those type of techniques to try and discover those by brute force? Would be fantastic, right?
It's mind-blowing to really look at what we're capable of achieving when it comes to atoms, and now we're getting smaller and all the names that we're coming up with. And listening to people that talk about this and totally understand the framework and the rationale, and you're scratching your head and trying to understand. I mean, even quantum calculation, I do not get into parallel universe or multiverse. Parallel universe maybe, but not multiverse, because the funny thing, when you listen to that theory, humans are always centric, right? If they say that there is possible universe, then it's related to me. But if you believe multiverse, then it would have to exist for every single molecule. And then that becomes, you can't connect the dots at that level. And also what you just said about artificial intelligence, I call it AI because everybody calls it AI, but in the end, it's a tool and that humans are part of, and we're going to be using it for good things or for bad things. We're going to hear about all the bad things, and we're not going to hear about the good things.
AI is like a test tube. Chemists use test tubes all the time, and you can use them to make bad things and make good things. It's just, yeah, I totally agree.
We underestimate ourselves. Like any system always works, like overall, like even just driving. I mean, it's incredible to think that with all the cars driving at high speed, there's no more accidents. If you look at the numbers, there should be so many more accidents. And then in reality, there's a trust in the system and everybody has an incentive to do good, because then it would be, it would not work. And it's usually the case for pretty much everything, everything else. But Lee, what are Lee's 3 words of wisdom? And besides breaking system, being the anarchist, and the poking the bear.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favourite words are, at the moment, if you were going to put me on the spot, I deliberately try not to think about them. I would say speculate, accumulate, and exaggerate. And I can explain what I mean. Speculate, I mean, just try new stuff, right? And see what works. So you accumulate those ideas, and the ideas that you think are interesting, exaggerate them, like do more of them, amplify them, and I find that to be incredibly good, a kind of evolutionary tactic if you're trying to just be creative. And creativity is something we don't understand, and I love human creativity. It never ceases to amaze me what we do. It's like, just think, I mean, let's look at YouTube for a few hours, right? It's just, it's crazy what we can do. So yeah, I really like being curious, and I like making people think. Sadly, the only way to get people to think when they're older is you have to make them slightly angry. And that's an indication that you've kind of pushed into through a cognitive barrier. Or some people won't get angry, but anger is a very good sign if you're prodding someone, as long as it's not in a bar and looking for a fight, right? So I think, speculate, accumulate, exaggerate.
These systems are dynamic, and every actor have a purpose in kind of shaking the status quo, to making people again reassess what is important and what needs, protection and investment. And you look at, politicians even like Trump. I mean, we can debate a lot of things, but there are facts from the reality of Trump. After Trump, there was an increase in women in politics. So the goal might not be to have them stay there too long, but the goal would be to understand their value and what they remind us, so that so the system can protect itself in the same way, like an immune system.
Yeah, I think that the system made Trump just to test it out, or it's a consequence. I mean, we're all actors in the great play, right? And I think. I don't want to speculate. Some people love Trump, some people hate Trump, but it's not just Trump. It is how our system allows things to go off and be tried and go, oh yeah, maybe that was a bad idea or that's a good idea. It just so happens that the American democratic system is a very interesting one, built on the UK one, and we have this very interesting tradition to try and make open society.
Yeah, democracy is messy. Churchill said it. But it's the best that we have. So, Lee, it's been a pleasure. I know it's late for you. Thank you so very much for taking the time. I love when I've learned about the work that you were doing. I love it, and now I love even more the mindset that you have. Right? There's a mischievous curiosity that you have, but always for good intention, and that's exactly how I proceed in my life. So. Thank you so much.
Oh, really good to talk to you. I enjoyed it.
Great. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you very much.